Guess what? We are back. Welcome, hello to the Customs Show with me,
Yes,
Arne Mielken, and of course, Graham Austin.
yes, welcome back to the Customs Show. It's the only show that's created for everyone involved in the world of customs, whether you're top professional or down at the micro level, trying to import and sell goods abroad.
Hey, and this is the only show, maybe in the world, that looks behind the scenes. And on all manners of customs issues, we want to give you an insight at what's coming up, what's going on, and what you can do about it. So
Yes.
we'll also answer some specific questions that you asked us in my question corner.
Yes, so please subscribe. Please subscribe, and you'll always be kept up to date with what we're doing. And talking of which, there's a lot going on in the year 2023. We've got a full year lined up. There's a lot of things going on. We've got the review of the UCC, that's the Union Customs Code. That's about to be published at any stage. We hold our breath for that. And there's some really key customs systems coming online, IT systems, which are really going to affect all of us. And we're really lucky and pleased to say that we have Walter van der Mieren, who's the Director of Customs Compliance at UPS. And Walter is someone that's been around. He's been the chair of the Customs Committee at AmCham EU, and he's also been chair of the EEA's Customs Committee up until just recently. So this man knows customs and what he's talking about. But first of all, let's maybe take a little look at some background. Electronic or e-customs, the digitisation of customs documentation and processes, is a major development for the EU and the Customs Union. The project will eventually replace paper-based declarations and other documentation with electronic procedures to create a more modern and efficient customs environment. This will be good for trade, customs authorities, and the EU and its citizens because it aims to improve safety and security. The first step to e-customs was the EU-wide electronic exchange of customs declarations, established with the new computerised transit system, ISC2, in 1997. Then, in 2008, a Commission decision set the basic framework for creating a paperless environment for customs and trade. This was set out in detail in the Multi-Annual Strategic Plan, or MASP. Despite being contained within the Union Customs Code, or UCC, and its derogated and implementing acts, there were delays. This is not like installing a new operating system on a computer. There are multiple projects, with some elements tasked for building centrally, with other parts the competency of member states to connect national systems together. This created significant and critical technical, legal, operational and privacy challenges. The result was a derogation to delay the completion of e-customs until 2025. Of course, this frustrated many traders that were keen to unlock the benefits of a paperless environment and had planned accordingly. Now we're in 2023, the implementation of many e-customs systems will hot up. The original system, ISC2, will launch phase 5 of its development. That will involve countries outside the EU. But more significantly for many, the fundamental new import control system, ISC2, Release 2, will go live on the 1st of March. With so much happening on the e-customs front, we invited Walter van der Mieren, Director of Customs Compliance at UPS, to talk about what some of these developments mean for everyone related to customs operations.
Hello, Walter. It is so great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us today. What a privilege.
Thank you.
So we've got a lot of questions that we want to get through. And so here's the first one. Just tell us, what do you expect about 2023? What are your expectations for the year?
Well, thank you, Arne. I expect this to be a year full of surprises, where economic operators that do international business with the EU will need to expect the unexpected. 2023 will be a year where not only the customs authorities of all 27 EU member states, but also Switzerland and Norway, as well as the UK, will be changing multiple customs IT systems to comply with new legislation. So it's going to be an exciting year, full of surprises, and we know where we start, but we do not know where it ends. As a business, you're looking for reliability and predictability. However, with the number of changes, the complexity, and the critical dependency of these changes, economic operators and particularly customs declarants will need to show a high level of flexibility and patience.
Okay, that's a little concerning, but honestly, Walter, I mean, we are all aware of the Union Customs Code, the UCC, right? And as we all know, there's a work program. Member states and EU need to implement IT systems according to this work program. So there is no problem. We know exactly what we're doing. The only thing we can't work out is what are Switzerland and Norway and the UK are doing. You mentioned them. Why are they involved?
Well, that has to do with the different agreements the EU has with its neighbors. For instance, on safety and security, the EU has bilateral agreements with Switzerland and Norway. So when the EU deploys the Import Control System 2 or ICS2, the requirements will also apply to these countries and they will need to change their systems. And as far as the UK is concerned, and also Norway and Switzerland, they are part of the Common Transit Convention. Being a member, they also will need to upgrade their systems to NCTS 5.
These changes, including NCTF 5, are not new. This cannot come as a surprise, right?
Indeed, you're perfectly right. And now stay with me because this is not going to be a short and easy answer. So here we go. First of all, the EU Commission has been working with an IT strategy for more than 15 years. It has proved a bigger job than we expected and needed significant transitional measures, which were provided for in Article 278 of the Union Customs Codes. Originally, Article 278 stated that all systems should have been implemented prior to the 31st of December 2020. Things were more complicated and the Commission was forced to change the article in 2019, extending the deadline to December 2025. That was, of course, not good because we know that the UCC is a very ambitious legislation that had simplicity, service, and speed as its key objectives. Its aim is to offer greater legal certainty and uniformity to business and increase clarity for customs officials throughout the EU. Its aim was also to complete the shift to a paperless and fully electronic customs environment, enhance the competitiveness of European trade aligned with the EU strategy for growth and jobs, protect the flow of goods transiting or moving in and out of the EU, and safeguard the financial and economic interests of the EU and of the member states, as well as the safety and security of EU citizens. So it was certainly not good for a business of any size that the completion of the UCC has been delayed by 5 years, especially because centralized clearance for import was delayed as a result. And centralized clearance is a bit the holy grail for trade, since it allows an economic operator to process its customs declarations through one supervising office in one member state, rather than dealing with 27 customs authorities and through 27 IT interfaces like we do today. Additionally, since 2014, the European Commission works with its UCC work program, which details when a specific system needs to be implemented. But it's not just the Commission. The member states need to align their implementation with this work program, as well as work on their national plans.
Makes sense. We've got a plan, then we've got the national plans within that plan. And that's all known. The timing's there. Everybody knows what to do and by when. And we got an additional 5 years. So how sure can we now be that the EU plan will be or the EU projects will be delivered on time, but also that all the member states can this time make the 2025 deadline.
At the start of 2023, trade has valid concern, and we think that this work program cannot be executed as planned. And let me show you this slide. As you can see, by the end of this year, a series of very important systems need to be deployed. And what is very concerning is that more than 20 member states have asked for derogations to delay the implementation of one or more systems, which means that timelines will be shifting, and this will have a knock-on effect. In my opinion, there are three very important systems that are in danger of being delayed. The Import Control System 2, Release 2, which imposes new preloading and pre-arrival data. NCTS 5, which imposes new requirements on shipments in transit. And Centralized Clearance for Import Phase 1, which introduces major benefits to customs and trade. Now, each of these phases is carefully timetabled and will significantly slow up the next stage if delayed. So, for instance, a delay on Centralized Clearance Phase 1 will push back Centralized Clearance for Import Phase 2, where VAT and excise goods are covered. In other words, the risk that all systems will not be deployed is very high. Furthermore, every member state has its own deployment timelines.
So, okay, that's not good news, but what does this practically mean? What does it mean for economic operator, for businesses, for customs declarants, for importers, for exporters, for transit operators? What does that mean? What do we do?
In order to answer that, we need to understand that the implementation of all these systems is not plug and play. An economic operator that needs to comply with the new system needs its own development, testing, and deployment. That needs to be done in every member state for every new system. And when member states do not publish full specification or change them or shift the timeline, economic operators need to delay, shift resources, change schedules. In other words, I'm afraid that what we see here is a plan to fail. We can only agree with the Dutch Customs Administration, which has asked the European Commission to come up with a revised plan in order to comply with the legal requirement to deploy all these systems prior to December 1st, 2025.
Walter, this sounds quite alarming. So practically, what can trade do about this?
Well, a number of EU-wide trade associations are requesting a special meeting of the Trade Contact Group. And the Trade Contact Group, or TCG as we call it, advises the Commission and member states on customs issues from a trade perspective. What we want is to address these issues and to come up with a realistic plan that meets the capabilities of the member states as well as the capabilities of trade. Now, DG Taxud has confirmed this meeting for February 28th, so we are hopeful.
I just remember we had this interview with the Vice Persons Group chairwoman. If I remember correctly, the report of the Vice Persons Group on the future of the customs union and the challenges, did that not also identify problems with IT or challenges with IT implementation? Did you see any solution to these problems in this report?
Yes, Arne. The Vice Persons Group found that the implementation of the IT systems still lags behind. And this delay impacts on the anticipated benefits of the changes introduced by the UCC. The lack of alignment of procedures and standards, notably for data collection and sharing, is also an obstacle for digitalization. Moreover, the Vice Persons Group stated that, and I quote, despite considerable efforts by the Commission and the Member States, customs systems are still mostly used to make more effective a traditional approach to customs clearance. Data currently used is declarative, often flawed, not easily cross-validated against other data sources, sometimes inconsistently shared and not available when required to all parts of the system. The Wise Persons Group recommends a new data approach. Customs data will come from the business systems of authorized economic operators and be based on underlying commercial data. Other data will be gathered from other sources, platforms, payment systems, to cross-check anomalies for risk assessments using blockchain when appropriate. Data will be integrated on common shared systems so that all member states' customs can access, and economies of scale for custom services and more effective, less variation was one of their recommendations. However, the Wise Persons Group support has no legal value. It is a tool of which the Commission has stated it will take into consideration when proposing a reform of the customs union. Now, we do not know the contents of that proposal, but what we do know is that this proposal will not be adopted before 2024, 2025, and its implementation might take also a couple of years. So we will have to live with the UCC work program, and that's also what the member states are telling. Let's first finish the UCC before we endeavor in a new enterprise. So we need to live with the UCC work program. The Commission, the member states, and trade have to work together to implement it, hopefully in a smart and pragmatic way.
Walter, you've got to forgive me. I really love the explanation and it makes it all really clear. But what can we do? What can the importers, as I've said before, the declarants, the importers, exporters do to cope with these new customs rules regarding systems, regarding the transportation of goods, especially maybe on this incoming ICS2 release 2 that you've mentioned? Can you share some light and some ideas and practical suggestions, given that you're in this every day, on what we should do?
Well, the big advice, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but for importers, exporters, is make sure that your commercial invoice contains all the data that you need. If you do that, you're already halfway. So depending on what I said earlier, there are two big changes that will be imposed in 2023. And the first one is indeed that deployment of the Import Control System 2, or ICS2 Release 2, that introduce new safety and security requirements for pre-departure and pre-arrival data for air cargo shipments entering the EU, Switzerland, Norway, and not to make it more complicated, also Northern Ireland. So that's a big one. And the second big change is the change from NCTS 4 to NCTS 5.
Okay, so as a traditional importer and exporter, there's nothing I need to worry about this year, right? Because if you're saying ICS2, I mean, I did my research too, Walter, and this does not affect everyone. Not every business is affected, right? This applies certainly only to customs declarants and transportation companies. So I appreciate this is a big deal for you, but as an importer, exporter, right?
Yeah, halfway correct, Arne. I mean, it all depends on data, as you know. And talking about ICS2 Release 2, more parties will be involved. So yes, you are right. The filing will be done by declarants and air carriers. However, they need to submit data that have to come from shippers, exporter, consignees, and importers. And one example is the Economic Operator Registration Identification, or EORI number of the consignee. With ICS Release 2, that will need to be submitted prior to the arrival of the goods, and the declarant or the carrier needs to collect this either from the shipper, the importer, or the consignee.
So importers, exporters may indeed be involved, huh? And
Yep.
then there is this worry about time scale. I think you mentioned this is the big change in 2023. So what are we talking about in terms of sequencing? ICS first, then NCTS 5, or what's happening? I'm getting confused.
Yeah, so the most pressing is certainly ICS2, because that is planned to come in effect in a few weeks on the 1st of March and will need to be deployed by the 2nd of October of this year. Having said that, 11 member states have asked for derogations, so the situation could change over the coming weeks. ICS2 is crucial, so if you will forgive me, I'll focus on that in the time remaining.
But here's what I don't get. Today, we submit a lot of data, and one could argue it's more or less safe. Yes. Now, tomorrow, you're going to ask for more data and have other people do more data submission, which is submitting the EORI number that we already are submitting today. So what have we gained? Excuse my ignorance. What have we gained in security? Why, or in other words, by doing ICS2, you tell me, why is the EU Commission imposing these new import controls?
It's certainly not ignorance, Arne. The EU wants to have safety and security information to protect its citizens through a risk assessment on shipment data, and it wants to improve that risk assessment. And that assessment aims to identify shipments that are a safety and security risk to EU citizens.
Tell me a little bit how this should work then. I mean, does it apply to all goods entering the EU? Are there some value limitations? Are there exceptions? What's the detail here? How shall I understand this?
Well, this applies to all goods moved by air that will touch the territory of the EU member states, Norway, Switzerland, and Northern Ireland, independent whether they will be imported or transiting through the EU, and independent of the value. And of course, it would not be customs legislation if there were no exceptions, like items of correspondence, goods covered by a Form 302, and diplomatic mail.
A few exceptions that are not relevant for the majority of all of us, really. What about the mode of transport then? We're talking every mode of transport that has to do the extra work now?
Well, there are three different releases of ICS2. Release 1, implemented in March last year, was applicable to shipments through express and postal. Release 2, as I said, to be implemented in March of this year, applies to all air movements. And finally, in March 2024, all transport modes will be subject to the new rules in Release 3.
Mm-hmm. So if you allow, and I know we're advancing in time here, but this is a fascinating subject, right? You said this filing is required. I, as an importer exporter, might not be filing myself, but I might be required to supply data at certain times to my business partners so that they can fulfill the legislation. So I am required to pay close attention to this entire new data requirement. So given that everybody needs to know about ICS2 phase 2, regardless of whether you're actually filing or not, we then need to know a little bit more about the mechanics, the technical stuff. So I understand we need this entry summary declaration to be filed under ICS2. Tell us from a technical perspective, what is the process required to file ENS under ICS2, if you don't mind?
No, certainly not. Well, the first data submission occurs in the preloading phase, where we submit a limited data set called Placky data, and there customs really looks at a bomb in the box, an IED that could cause harm to the plane and to civilians. The second data submission occurs 4 hours prior to arrival for long haul or on wheels up or short haul, where we submit a complete data set. And I cannot emphasize this enough. This is very important. Should not be an issue for exporters or importers, as long as you provide us with a good invoice, and that means an accurate description of every line item, an HS code, 6-digit, and of course the EORI number when available. We then submit the notification on arrival and present the goods to customs. Customs run its risk assessment and decides whether they need more information to complete their risk assessment. Hopefully, that will allow the goods to be released, and that will be the case in most of the shipments. But if the data are not sufficient to run the risk assessment, customs has identified the risk. The shipment can be put on hold until assessment is complete. And I hope that gives your viewers a flavor of the importance of ICS2.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. And yeah, So I think this is very insightful, and I can clearly see now how this is an important step involving everyone in the chain of importing and exporting. And honestly, listening to you, I could be listening for many more hours here about this topic. So I think we could do with a bit of a deep dive on ICS, and maybe that's something we could do in the future, and you could come back on and tell us a little bit more about this.
Yeah, I would be happy to, and I have to reconfirm. I mean, it all comes down to best practices. If you are, as an exporter, importer, working with complete, accurate invoices with the correct information, there's not going to be issues. So I'm very happy to go into more detail there.
Okay. Good. We'll set it up. Before we stop, and I know we've been talking for quite a while now, the other big project later on in the year is NCTS 5. Now, briefly, if you may, can you tell us a little bit about this new phase of NCTS phase 5? What's that all about?
So NCTS stands for New Computerized Transit System. It is the system that covers movements of goods in bond. It's subject to the rules agreed in the Common Transit Convention, and the countries that are part of that Common Transit Convention need to apply this system. Most notably, it's not only the EU, it's also the UK. So there's no big bang deployment at a certain date, but the migration for NCTS 4 to 5 should be completed by December of this year.
Can you just explain very quickly what's actually changing? I mean, what are the major changes with NCTS 5?
Yeah, the new functionality that comes into place is there will be information exchange message. There's a new process of incident registration. There will be additional layers of risk management, because also here EORI and HS code come into play. And there's a monitoring of the guarantee reference amount. But for us, one of the main benefits is the ability to pre-lodge the transit declaration and to use a reduced data set. Obviously, there's a lot of more that viewers should wish to be aware of, but perhaps I could cover that the next time.
Indeed, it would be much appreciated. Walter, what an insightful moment we have shared here together. And I'm sure as many people in the comments will tell us, it's been special. And that's an understatement to have you on this show, because how often do I hear, if only we could pick the brains of the experts in the field? And that's what we do. We bring the experts to you. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm sure the viewers have found it most useful. And yeah, maybe it did inspire them to look at the implications for their operations, for their import, their export, their transit. And of course, we only touched on the surface. We scratched the surface, as you say, on all of these topics that we could talk about for such a long time. So I really hope you enjoyed it, and you are going to come back onto the Customs show, and maybe, just maybe, ICS2 can be a topic, NCTS 5 can be a topic, but also, why not talk about the review of the Union Customs Code? We could talk about that as well.
It would be surely a pleasure to do that. So thanks for having me, and have a nice day, Arne.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Well, that was an amazing interview. We're so lucky that Walt had the time to come and speak to us, and I'm sure our viewers are going to take a lot out of that, because all right, we work at a certain level, we know some of these things, but awareness is so important. And you know, I have to say, Arne, that his experience, I think, speaks for itself, and his advice is spot on. What was your takeaway from all of that?
Well, look, it's not often you get to speak to an esteemed customs expert who works on these things and who's impacted by EU policy and law decisions on a day-to-day basis. So he sits at crucial point in the supply chain for many businesses. And when he speaks and he says, this is what you should be doing, this is what's coming up, we're going to be operating in this customs environment in order to move your goods.
Exactly.
Well, we ought to listen, right? And how many businesses would like the opportunity to speak to one of their key partners in the supply chain for this length of time? And it speaks to Walter, it speaks to the trade associations and the businesses that he represents, but also that we all represent in the trade contact group, that we to seek the conversation and that we don't shy away from critical questions. And the last bit, Graham, is that we are willing to have this recorded on record, to go on social media with our views and our understanding, which, as you know, once it's on social media, it's on social media, right? And it can go in all directions. So as we say in French, chapeau for coming on and allowing us to record his views, his ideas. And there's a lot of prep that went into it, you know, doing all the slides, preparing for it. So he's really taking the customs show seriously. He doesn't take it for granted that people watch this, but people actually have to take time to digest what a leading customs authority figure in the EU says about customs. So sorry for being so long-winded, but the point is I was very impressed, and I value this input that you can watch over and over and over again because it's recorded.
That's right. I fully agree. I think that's something that's so important. And all I have to say is, you know, we're talking about information, advice, and I think that probably gives us a nice little segue into Arne's Customs Corner.
Oh, let's do it. Let's do it.
So, welcome to Arne's Questions Corner. And this time we have 3 questions that will test Arne. And the first one comes from Gertrude in Germany. Can you share some tips to save customs duty? What's your top tips, Arne? Oh dear,
Gertrude. Okay, top tips to save customs duty out of the top of my head. Well, there are loads out of the top of my head. What about, first of all, check your tariff codes, right? So make sure the tariff codes are correct, commodity codes, HS codes, CN codes, whatever you want to call it. The right classification can, you know, lead to custom savings, possibly. You know, if you get it wrong, could be a higher rate of duty. So easiest one is just make sure the customs duty is paid according to the correct tariff of the product that you're importing. So that's an easy one. Of course, the next obvious one is origin and free trade agreements. You want to make sure you can leverage all of your free trade agreements. The EU has some 70 plus agreements that you could leverage. So depending on where the goods are coming from and what the economic origin of the product is, if there's a free trade agreement signed, that might entitle you to reduced customs duty. So that's an easy save. Third, you might want to think about the customs value, right? It's a bit more tricky, but there are additions and deductions that go with customs value. Now, depending on various scenarios, circumstances, Incoterms, the likes of it, you may be entitled to deduct certain expenses, and that could lower than the customs value. The customs value is the basis for calculating your customs duty. So the lower the value, the lower the duty rate, I guess. But of course, it has to be within the law, right? Within the regulation. So make sure you speak to someone if you're not quite sure how to get to a customs value and you understand what are permissible legal deductions. So there's 3 ideas. Fourth idea is also quite obvious. There are about 5, not more, duty relief programs. Some are well known, otherwise are not well known. So you want to make sure that you look at all of these and you think about, could they apply to my business? And what are the arguments for it? I had duty savings, and what are the arguments against it? Maybe administration, red tape. So you want to weigh the benefits of that. So these are 4, maybe one more, although there are more. I would need to think about that. But the other one that comes to mind, and a pretty obvious one, is autonomous duty suspensions. So this is the one where that you couldn't apply to the government. So the EU, for example, twice a year and say, well, I would like my duty suspended. And in certain circumstances where there's a genuine need for this product, usually they're not, massively processed product. They're more raw materials that we don't have in the EU. Then there could be an argument for making that zero rating that. So because it's a critical component of your manufacturing process. So autonomous duty suspension is something you request, for which you need to make an argument, you need to make a case, and you need to submit it to the EU Commission or the UK or whichever country you're looking at. And that drops the duty then down to 0. So these are 5 ideas. I'm going to stop it here, but we could do another video where I'll tell you possibly 5 others.
Yeah. I think another video on special procedures and some of these ways of saving money would be just the ticket.
Yeah, why not?
But yeah, that's something we'll think about.
Hey, Graham, maybe I'll get to be a guest on the customs show.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, guest and host. But we also have another similar question from Marcus in Denmark, who asks, can you share some ideas on how to improve customs compliance without costing?
Okay, customs compliance now.
Yes. Your top 3 on that one.
Top 3. Okay, great. Look, I've just come out of the interview with Walter, and if there's one thing that I take out of this is data. It's all about automation, digitalization, isn't it? So data is the thing. So let's make sure it's complete, it's timely, and it's accurate. These 3 things, I know this is easier said than done, but data cleansing, avoidance of duplications, all of that is so important, because don't forget the customs systems, they love one thing, and that's data. There's no human person looking at this. It's only the computer looking at whatever you feed it. So data is the key to compliance, right? Complete, timely, and accurate. The second thing I would say, if you require me to limit me to 3, is of course customs compliant processes and procedures. What else would you expect, right? So you'd need to make sure that whatever you do is checked from a customs compliance point of view, and that it operates in the confines of the law and the regulation as it is intended. So I'm expecting SOPs and KPIs and all of that good stuff that I can view, and I can see that you are acting within the requirements of the legislator. That's 2. And 3 is knowledge. What can I say? I need customs competencies much more developed. I can only recommend that you look at the EU customs competency model. This lists the 20+ customs competencies that we expect customs professional to master. And that means not knowing only, but also it's the difference between knowledge and competencies is that one I know, but can't execute on day-to-day work. But being competent means not only do I know, but I can also operate it in a compliant manner. So data, compliance processes, and knowledge/education/developing proper competencies would be my top 3. But there are more.
Yeah, sure. And obviously, if you want to explore any of these top tips in more detail, get in contact with us. Arne would be pleased to help.
Sure.
And our last question comes from John in the Netherlands, who says, what are your top tips for working with customs brokers?
Ooh, and this is when we just had Walter on. Graham, I need to be very careful here. I mean, not that he's a broker, but you know what I mean, right? This is third parties. We need to be very careful here. But overall, if you think about it, brokers are your partners. Customs agents are the one that make it happen. They can save you money, and they can ensure that you're compliant. So they are your partners. So treat them as an extended arm of your company, and you would want them to believe that they are part of your operations too. So they're actors in the supply chain, and they're important actors in the supply chain. And the better you work with them, the better results you're going to get. The more you're going to save, and the more you're going to be compliant. And that means you're going to have smooth sailing, right? No stopping. So this is for ISC2 and NCTS 5 is going to be so important. So no surprise here. That data I was mentioning in compliance, right? Point number 1, data. It has to go now to the broker. So make sure you transmit this data and that the data is correct, complete, timely, and accurate. Because if that data goes to the broker, well, the broker is going to love it. With that comes, of course, the documents, all the certificates, all the permits. Have them ready, have them available. maybe a broker management system or some kind of interface where you can upload them so that the broker doesn't need to send you an email to request it. Know what you have to give the broker, what codes, what reference codes you need to give the broker so that they can file the customs declaration for you. And the third is, again, something that has to do with compliance, I'm afraid, but this time not internally in a company, but externally with your partners, and that's the SOPs and KPIs. As they are an extended arm to your business, they too should have clear instructions as to what they're supposed to do. Please complete box so-and-so if you're using SADs, C88 / if you're using CDS / AES / the new UCC data model, you'd be talking about data elements 2, 3. Please enter this in this document. Tell them how you want it done. Don't let them guess what you might want, right? So clear instructions, and that also means KPIs. And then I finish, I promise. KPIs, meaning how many errors has this broker committed? How quickly do you get the customs declaration done? What kind of issues being raised? All of these kind of things. So you want to do this in a smart way, in an intelligent way, but considering the broker as your fulfilling agent, your partner in this operation, and treating them with the same respect, but also with the same obligations and responsibilities, is going to be the way forward. Is that enough?
I think that will help, John. That will keep him going. Things to think about. Once again, thanks ever so much, Arne.
No problem. It is my pleasure. Always bring them on. Bring them on. Can't wait.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we'll have a whole bunch of new questions for the next show.
Hey, just one more thing while we're at this here. If you watching this, if you have a question, why don't you pop that in the chat, or you send us an email? Just make sure we've got these great questions coming in, because I really love them and I love researching them. I love answering them. So for the questions corner, please give us your questions.
Yeah, definitely. But for now, that's the end of Arne's Customs Corner. Well, thanks ever so much for those answers once again, Arne. That was a great questions corner. And I think that probably brings us to the end of the show for this edition.
It goes too quick. It goes too quick. Graham, it goes too quick.
Yeah, it was absolutely chock full of good advice. What with Walter's interview and the answers to the questions that were posed to you, on, I think that was really, really absolutely brimming with goodness today. But we've got the other show, and episode 4 already in planning, and we'll let you know what that one's going to be about. But as you probably gathered from what we've been talking about, that there's an awful lot to cover this year.
That's right.
But as we said before, welcome to this show if it's your first time, and thank you for watching this long. And if you haven't, subscribe, like,
and follow and share and tell everybody about this show.
Yeah, tell everyone, share it and comment. Let us know what you think, and any ideas that you would like us to take into account, we will be pleased to do. Clean, good, wholesome ideas, of course. But we'd be pleased to do that. But for now, I think it's goodbye from me and Arne.
Bye-bye, everyone. See you next time. Can't wait.